When they saw him, they worshiped, but they doubted. The 11 disciples doubted. They doubted a man who turned water into wine, drove out evil spirits, calmed storms, made the blind see, the mute speak. They doubted the man who fed thousands, walked on water, raised Lazarus from the dead. They, or at least some of the 11, doubted the man who called them by name, the man who they journeyed with day by day for 3 years. They doubted the man who was crucified on Good Friday only to rise again 3 days later and then stand before them with holes in his hands and his feet. And though they see him and though they worship him, they still doubt it. As I was reflecting on this passage the night before my ordination, staring at that crucifix sitting right there where Morton is, I wondered how they could doubt. They had so much evidence. How could they doubt? And then I was gently reminded of my own doubts throughout my years of formation. The miracles and the evidence of God's presence and calling in my own life over these past 5 years was so rich that it would seem that I, like the disciples, would have no excuse to doubt. I entered seminary terrified of what the future might hold. The thought of preaching a homily or even having a life without a family of my own was so far-fetched that I wouldn't dare think about it. Oh, I never stopped worshiping, but I also never stopped doubting. Miracle after miracle, it couldn't be more clear what God was calling me to do. From passing metaphysics, to meeting amazing brother seminarians, to being adopted by a random Covington family, and even having one of them marry a sibling. From little signs to great joys, the evidence of Christ's divinity, power, love came in ways that were as clear as if I had seen his fleshly body walk on water myself. But I doubt it. But the beautiful part is, though they doubt it, and though we all doubt in some ways, Jesus does not and did not condemn. He approaches. He comes closer. He welcomes the dialogue. He tells the disciples, all power on heaven and on earth has been given to me, greeting them with a declaration of his supreme authority. As King of heaven and earth, he goes on to confer a missionary mandate to go, therefore, and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And then he ends with a promise that he will be with them until the end of the age. With this promise, with these last words, it's safe to say at this point the 11 were starting to feel a little bit more confident. Though they received the epic task of baptizing all nations, as long as Jesus was going to be with them, then I'm sure they thought they had a chance. But then we fast forward to the feast we celebrate today. The Ascension, 40 days after his resurrection, Jesus' disciples are gathered together, and he tells them about the power of the Holy Spirit that will soon come upon him. The Feast of the Pentecost, which we will celebrate next Sunday. And then lo and behold, Christ hops on a cloud and ascends to heaven to be seated at the right hand of his Father. He left. There are writings about the joy his disciples experienced during this ascension, and I'm sure there was joy. Simply being in the presence of Christ, nevertheless, him floating on a cloud in front of them, yes, I'm sure there was some joy. Yet at the same time, these men are watching their Lord, their leader, their best friend, their God in human flesh, leave them. Now, having worked at a summer camp in Arkansas for 5 years, that, with the exception of Disney World with a fast pass, is arguably one of the happiest places for a kid to be. I have come to find that there are typically two types of reactions from young campers as their parents begin to drive away. The first type of camper is the one who is initially excited and confident but allows a little doubt to creep in. This kid knows he's in an amazing place. He knows he's about to have an extraordinary time, and he even knows that in a short period of time, his parents will return to get him. So there is some joy in this kid, but there is still some sadness. As their rock, their foundation, their mom, their dad gets back into their Suburban and drives away. And so it is with the disciples. As they look intently at the sky with perhaps a new doubt setting in. Not a doubt of who the Son of God is, but a doubt in their own capabilities to live out their particular vocation. How are we supposed to baptize all nations when there are 1 million people in Jerusalem alone, some of which I know don't like us? How am I supposed to write thousands of homilies when it's taken me this long to come up with one? These questions look different for all of us. And they typically do not derive from goodness, but from evil trying to prevent us from living out God's will. One of our sayings in the seminary is Deus providebit. God will provide. And if there is one thing I have learned throughout my years of formation, it is that if we stay true to our responsibilities, persevere in prayer, willing to make the necessary sacrifices, He will provide in ways greater than we can ever imagine. Just like the little camper wouldn't be able to experience growth and new adventures if his parents stayed, the disciples and all of us could not live out the mission Christ has called for us if He remained physically on earth. By ascending into heaven, He serves as mediator between God and man, bringing our weak human nature, which He united to Himself, ascending not to distance Himself from us, from our lowly state, but to show us that we, His members, are to be confident in where we are going. Our head and our founder has gone before us. But don't forget there is a second type of camper. And this is the camper who can't wait for his parents to drive off. He acts like a little angel, sitting there quietly on his bed. And then, as they get back in that Suburban and drive away and no longer in sight, he goes absolutely wild. Well, yes, he has every intention of returning to that little angel as soon as his parents arrive to come and get him. But in the meantime, he will push his camp counselor to new dimensions of patience and mercy as he tries to break all the rules before sunset. Unfortunately, though, this mindset is pretty common amongst Catholics today. Too many of us have somehow come to the conclusion that we will get right with God, return to the sacraments, start going to Mass, only at the end of camp. Christ has ascended. He is up there, we are down here. We all desire to get up there. Therefore, we have every intention to return to worship, but only in our later years, only in a more convenient time, or only when trial and tribulations arise to such a degree that we have nowhere else to go. In the meantime, the Lord's commandments, prayer, are just thrown out the window. So now we have to ask ourselves some questions. Are we like that first camper that is confident in the Lord and His ways, yet allows doubt to handicap our full potential? Constantly asking when He will return, looking intently at the sky, thinking to ourselves that we aren't strong enough, we aren't smart enough, we aren't holy enough, we aren't good enough to live out this vocation Christ has asked, coming up with excuses to prevent us from going the extra mile. Or could we be like that second camper, whose main goal is simply to find personal pleasure in doing what makes him happy? And if that means breaking the rules or even making up new ones to justify his actions, then so be it. Christ is asking us today to take a step back, to remember the small miracles in our lives, the blessings, the gifts that brought us to this church today to celebrate this great feast. He is asking that we find time for silence and worship every day. And particularly over this Memorial Day weekend, to not just focus on the deals at Academy, but on the men and women who gave their lives for this country. He is asking us to remember that though we may doubt at times, He does not condemn. For this Jesus who has been taken up from us into heaven will return the same way. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations.